Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply choosing compassion when the world expects you to turn away. In the harsh winter mountains of medieval Europe, a lonely woman named Elenora made a choice that would change her life forever. Living alone in a frozen cave, she found a bloodied stranger dying in the snow. She brought him inside to heal. He was a vampire. Soon others came, wounded and desperate. Her small sanctuary became their refuge. The leader among them was ancient and powerful, yet he watched her with wonder. No human had ever shown his kind such mercy. In the quiet nights by firelight, something unexpected began to grow between them. But when word of her secret spread, everything she had built would be put to the test. Would love be enough to protect them both when the world came hunting? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The tarnished bronze bell hung silent in the deepest alcove of the cave, its surface green with age and neglect. Once, it had called the dying to sanctuary, summoning monks who offered final comfort to those the world had abandoned. Now it watched over a different kind of guardian, one who had never taken holy vows, yet understood sacred duty perhaps better than those who had. Elenora pressed her palm against the cold stone wall and felt the mountain's heartbeat, slow, ancient, eternal. The glacial cave stretched back into darkness, its chambers carved by ice and time into something that resembled a cathedral more than a mere shelter. Centuries ago, Benedictine monks had discovered this natural fortress and transformed it into a hospice for pilgrims who would never complete their journeys. They had carved niches for candles, smoothed walking paths, and installed drainage channels that kept the living areas dry even when spring melt threatened to flood the outer chambers. The monks were long gone, scattered by wars and plague, but their legacy remained in every carefully placed stone, every deliberate modification that made survival possible in this frozen sanctuary. Elenora had found their chapel 7 winters ago, when her own journey had ended abruptly and violently. She had been fleeing then, carrying nothing but her herbalist's knowledge and the bitter taste of betrayal. Her exile had begun with whispered accusations in the village below. Witch, they called her, though she had done nothing but heal their children and ease their elders' pain. When the crops failed and the sickness came, they needed someone to blame. A woman who lived alone, who knew too much about herbs that could heal or harm, who spoke with authority about matters of life and death. She made a convenient scapegoat. The morning they came with torches, she had already packed her few belongings. Village leaders, men she had helped countless times, stood in her doorway with shame and determination warring in their faces. "You have until sunset," the blacksmith had said, unable to meet her eyes. "After that, we cannot guarantee your safety." She had walked away without argument, carrying her mortar and pestle, carved from stone so old it seemed to hold memory itself, and a small bag of the most essential herbs. The mountain had called to her then, promising solitude and peace. She had not expected to find a home, but this cave had become exactly that. In the main chamber, she had arranged her few possessions with the care of someone who understood that small comforts could mean the difference between surviving and living. Thick furs covered sleeping alcoves carved into the walls. Clay pots held dried herbs, their scents mingling into something both medicinal and welcoming. A central fire pit, positioned beneath a natural chimney, provided warmth and cooking space. The mortar and pestle held place of honor on a stone shelf she had cleared and smoothed herself. Passed down through generations of healers, It had ground medicine for lords and peasants alike. Its stone surface had absorbed oils and essences until it seemed to glow with accumulated wisdom. When Elenora worked with it, grinding willow bark for pain or preparing poultices for wounds, she felt connected to all the women who had wielded it before her. Water came from a spring deeper in the cave system, ice cold but pure and constant. She had learned to read the mountain's moods through the spring's flow. When storms approached, the water would sing differently as it moved through hidden channels. In the deepest winter, she sometimes heard voices in that singing, whispers of the monks who had once blessed this water and called it holy. Her days followed patterns established by necessity and refined by 7 years of solitude. Dawn brought the feeding of her small fire, careful rationing of wood she had gathered during the brief mountain summer. She checked her stores, dried fish, preserved vegetables, herbs hanging in bundles from the ceiling. Winter demanded constant vigilance against hunger and cold. The herbalist's knowledge that had damned her in the village served her well in isolation. She knew which plants could be harvested even under snow, which roots would sustain her when food ran low, how to prepare tinctures that would stave off the lung fever that claimed so many in these mountains. Her hands, once soft from a comfortable life, had grown strong and scarred from this harsher existence. But knowledge of healing carried its own burden. She understood too well the fragility of life, the narrow margins that separated wellness from sickness, warmth from freezing death. Every winter brought pilgrims who had lost their way, traders whose wagons had broken down, hunters trapped by sudden storms. Most she could save, warming them by her fire, treating frostbite and exhaustion, sending them on their way with restored strength. Some arrived too late for her help. These she buried in the small cemetery the monks had established behind the cave, adding wooden markers to commemorate lives that had ended in her care. She spoke prayers over them, not from any deep religious conviction, but because death deserved acknowledgement, and the dead deserved to be remembered by someone. The loneliness was a living thing, especially during the longest winter nights. She spoke aloud to herself, narrating her activities to fill the pressing silence. "The fire needs building up," she would say, "or these herbs are drying well." Sometimes she imagined conversations with her long-dead grandmother, the woman who had first taught her to see healing properties in common weeds. But loneliness had also taught her valuable lessons about the nature of compassion. When you had no one to impress, no reputation to maintain, no social expectations to fulfill, you could make choices based purely on what felt right. She had learned to trust her instincts about people, to read the difference between genuine need and dangerous deception. Most importantly, she had discovered that mercy, given freely, without expectation of reward, carried a power that transcended simple human kindness. The cave's history whispered to her in quiet moments. She had found traces of the monks' presence, carved prayers in Latin, worn smooth by countless fingers, hidden chambers where they had stored grain and preserved foods, a small library alcove where fragments of manuscripts still survived, their parchment yellow but readable. The monks had been healers too, in their way. They had understood that sometimes the greatest service was simply to provide refuge when the world became too harsh to bear. Winter this year had come early and fierce. The snows began in late autumn and showed no signs of stopping. Her stores were adequate, but not generous. She would need to be careful to make them last until spring. The cold was deeper than usual, the kind that crept into bones and settled there like an ache that would not fade. She had been checking her outer defenses, the barriers of stone and wood that helped keep the worst winds from penetrating her living spaces, when she noticed the tracks in the fresh snow. Not the neat prints of rabbits or the splayed marks of snow foxes. These were made by something larger, something that walked on two legs, but left impressions too deep and too widely spaced for any normal human traveler. Standing in her doorway, wrapped in the thick wool cloak that served as both coat and blanket, Elenora studied those tracks with the careful attention of someone whose survival depended on understanding every detail of her environment. They led from the forest below, winding up the treacherous mountain path that few dared to attempt, even in good weather. Whatever had made them was strong enough to traverse terrain that would have stopped a horse, determined enough to continue climbing, even as the snow grew deeper. The tracks ended just beyond the range of her vision, disappearing into the swirling white that made it impossible to see more than a few yards in any direction. But their direction was unmistakable. They were heading straight for her sanctuary. 7 years of isolation had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about those tracks made her skin prickle with warning. They were too precise, too purposeful. Whatever was making them knew exactly where it was going. More troubling still, they showed no sign of the stumbling or wandering that marked lost travelers. These tracks spoke of intention and capability that suggested their maker was no ordinary mountain wanderer in need of assistance. She retreated into the cave and began her preparations. Extra wood on the fire to build heat reserves. Her few weapons, a hunting knife, a staff she had carved from oak, placed within easy reach. Most importantly, her medicines arranged and ready. If trouble was coming, she would meet it as she had learned to meet all challenges in this place, prepared, alert, and guided by the compassion that had become both her greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness. The storm was growing stronger, and darkness was falling fast. Soon, whatever was following those tracks would arrive at her door. The blizzard struck with the fury of something alive and angry. Wind howled through the mountain passes, driving snow horizontal and turning the world into a white void where up and down lost all meaning. Elenora had weathered many such storms, but this one carried an edge of violence that made her press her back against the cave wall and listen to the mountain's distress. She was grinding willow bark by firelight when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or settling snow. A crash, followed by what might have been a groan, though the storm made it impossible to be certain. Years of solitude had sharpened her hearing, taught her to distinguish between the mountain's natural voices and the sounds made by living things in trouble. Another crash, closer this time. Something was moving out there in conditions that should have been impossible for any creature to survive. Elenora set down her mortar and reached for her heavy cloak. Every instinct she possessed screamed against leaving the warmth and safety of her sanctuary, but a deeper instinct, one that had guided her through 7 years of healing work, pulled her toward the cave entrance. The wind nearly knocked her down the moment she stepped outside. Snow struck her face like frozen needles, and the cold bit through her thick wool as if it were gossamer. She squinted into the white chaos, seeing nothing but the wild dance of snowflakes in the dim light that escaped from her cave. Then she saw him, a dark shape against the snow, perhaps 20 feet from her doorway. At first she thought it was a fallen tree or a boulder dislodged by the storm. But as she fought her way closer, the shape resolved into the unmistakable form of a man collapsed face down in a drift that was rapidly burying him. He was not moving. In this cold, that likely meant he was already dead. The wise thing, the safe thing, would be to retreat to her cave and wait for the storm to pass. One person could not save someone who had frozen to death, and attempting rescue might well cost her own life. But even as these thoughts formed, Elenora was already struggling through the snow toward the fallen figure. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. A healer who calculates the cost before offering aid is no healer at all. She reached him and immediately understood why he had fallen so close to her sanctuary, yet made no attempt to call for help. He was unconscious, his breathing so shallow it was barely detectable. His clothing, once fine, was torn and blood-stained. Most alarming were the wounds she could see even through the fabric. Deep gashes that should have bled much more than they had, surrounded by skin that was pale beyond what even extreme cold could explain. Wrestling his dead weight from the snowdrift required all her strength and several desperate minutes during which the storm threatened to bury them both. He was tall and solidly built, heavier than any man she had moved before. But desperation granted her capabilities she didn't know she possessed, and somehow she managed to drag him across the threshold into her cave. In the firelight, she got her first clear look at him. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable, matted with snow and blood. A face that might have been handsome under better circumstances, now grey-pale and drawn with whatever pain had driven him into the storm. His clothes had once been expensive, fine wool and leather, cut in a style she didn't recognize, but which suggested both wealth and travel. The blood-stained silver amulet around his neck caught her attention immediately. It was old, possibly ancient, bearing symbols that seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen them before. The metal was warm to the touch despite his body's chill, and something about it made her fingers tingle when she lifted it to examine the markings more closely. But her examination of mysterious jewelry would have to wait. The man was dying, and her healer's training took precedence over curiosity. She began the familiar ritual of assessment that had saved dozens of lives in this cave. Pulse, present but weak and strangely slow. Breathing, shallow but steady. Temperature, far too cold, yet not the bone-deep chill she would expect from someone who had been exposed to the storm. The wounds were what puzzled her most. 3 deep gashes across his chest, too precise and evenly spaced to be accidental. They looked like claw marks, but no mountain creature she knew could make cuts that clean. Stranger still, the wounds showed signs of healing that should have taken days, not hours. The edges had already begun to close, and what blood remained was dark, almost black in the firelight. She cleaned the wounds with water warmed over the fire, applying poultices made from herbs that promoted healing and fought infection. His skin was cold as marble beneath her touch, but she felt the steady rhythm of his heart, stronger than his weak pulse had suggested. Everything about him defied her understanding of normal human physiology, yet her hands continued their work with the automatic precision of long practice. As she worked, she found herself studying his face more carefully. There was something ageless about his features, a quality that made it difficult to judge whether he was 25 or 40. His hands, when she examined them for additional injuries, were calloused in patterns that spoke of sword work. Yet the calluses seemed old, as if formed long ago and maintained through continued practice rather than recent learning. When she lifted his eyelids to check his pupils, she drew back with a sharp intake of breath. His eyes were open, pale blue, almost silver, and focused on her face with an awareness that suggested he had been conscious for some time. They were beautiful eyes, but there was something in them that made her heart race with an emotion that had nothing to do with attraction. They were the eyes of a predator. "You should not have brought me here," he said. His voice was deep, cultured, carrying an accent she couldn't identify. Despite his injuries and exposure, he spoke with perfect clarity, no trace of the confusion she would expect from someone who had nearly frozen to death. "You were dying in the snow," she replied, settling back on her heels but keeping her hands ready to resume treatment if necessary. "I could not leave you there. You do not understand what you have done." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the furs she had arranged beneath him. I am not what you think I am. You are injured and cold and far from any help except mine," Elenora said firmly. "Whatever else you might be can wait until you are strong enough to leave my cave." Something that might have been amusement flickered in those pale eyes. "You have a healer's stubbornness. It will be both blessing and curse to you, I think. Are you a wanted man? A criminal fleeing justice?" The directness of the question surprised her, but something about his manner demanded equal honesty in return. "I am something far more dangerous than a criminal." He watched her face carefully as he spoke. "But I am not evil, despite what your priests might tell you. I have never harmed someone who did not first threaten those under my protection." "Then we understand each other," she said. "I have been called many things by people who feared what they did not understand. Witch, heretic, dealer with dark forces. Yet I have never used my knowledge for anything but healing." He studied her with those unsettling eyes. "You would offer sanctuary to something you do not understand, simply because it was in need. I would offer sanctuary to someone in need, regardless of what I understood about them." She returned his gaze steadily. "Though I am beginning to suspect that someone may not be the correct word." A sound that was almost a laugh escaped him. "You are either very wise or very foolish. In my experience, the difference between wisdom and foolishness often becomes clear only in hindsight." She reached for her bowl of herbal tea. "Can you drink? You need warmth and fluids." He accepted the bowl with hands that trembled only slightly. As he drank, she noticed that his color was already improving, the grey pallor giving way to something that looked more human. The wounds across his chest had closed completely, leaving only faint red lines that looked weeks old rather than hours. "My name is Kieran," he said finally. "Elenora." She hesitated, then added, "And if you are not human, you are still welcome in this sanctuary. The monks who built this place believed it should shelter all who came in genuine need. The others will be coming," he said quietly. "They will have followed my trail, though the storm may delay them. When they arrive, you will face a choice that will determine whether you live or die. Others like you?" "Yes." His eyes met hers, and she saw something that might have been regret. "And they will not all be as grateful for your kindness as I am." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, but within the cave, a strange peace had settled. Elenora looked at the silver amulet gleaming on his chest, at the impossible wounds that had already healed, at eyes that reflected firelight like those of a nocturnal hunter. She was harboring something supernatural in her sanctuary, something that would bring danger to her door. Yet as she watched Kieran's face in the firelight, she felt no fear, only the familiar satisfaction of a life saved, and the growing certainty that this storm had brought her something far more significant than another lost traveler. Her choice to drag him from the snow had been made from compassion and instinct. Now she would have to live with whatever consequences that choice would bring. The ring was the first thing that made Elenora truly understand what she had brought into her sanctuary. She discovered it the next morning while gathering Kieran's torn clothing to assess what could be salvaged and what needed replacing from her limited stores. Black iron, worn smooth by age, bearing a symbol that made her breath catch in her throat. She had seen similar markings in the fragments of manuscripts the monks had left behind, warnings about creatures that walked in darkness, predators that wore human faces but possessed neither human hearts nor human weaknesses. The ring marked its bearer as pack leader, alpha among creatures that most believed existed only in fearful whispers and children's nightmares. "You found it." Kieran's voice was stronger, now, though he remained resting on the furs she had arranged for him. In daylight, filtering through the cave entrance, he looked more human than he had the night before, but there was still something indefinably other about him. "I was looking for salvageable clothing." She held the ring up, watching how it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This tells a different story than the one you've shared with me." "What story do you think it tells?" Elenora set the ring carefully on the stone shelf beside her mortar and pestle. "That you are not simply a traveler who lost his way in a storm, that the others you mentioned are not merely companions, but subordinates, that whatever brought you to my mountain was important enough to risk traveling in weather that could kill." Kieran attempted to sit up, moving slowly but with evident determination. The wounds across his chest had vanished completely, leaving skin that looked as if it had never been broken. "You are observant as well as compassionate, a dangerous combination in someone who chooses to live alone." "I have survived 7 years in these mountains by being observant. Your ring, your impossible healing, your warnings about others coming, they paint a picture I am still learning to see clearly." She moved to check the fire, giving herself time to think. "But they do not change my decision to help you. They should." There was something almost urgent in his voice. "Do you understand what I am, Elenora?" She considered her words carefully. "I understand that you are not human, though you wear human form. I understand that you heal impossibly fast, and that your body runs colder than it should. I suspect you require something other than food and water to sustain yourself, though you haven't asked me for anything I could not provide. And if I told you that I sustain myself on the blood of the living, that I am what your people call vampire, creature of darkness and damnation?" The words hung in the air between them. Elenora felt her heart skip, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity of understanding. Everything about him, the pallor, the cold skin, the predator's eyes, the impossible healing, it all aligned with stories she had heard whispered in the village below, tales dismissed as superstition by the educated, but believed absolutely by those who worked close to the earth and understood that the world held mysteries beyond human comprehension. "Then I would say that you chose starvation rather than taking what you needed from me while I slept," she said finally, "which suggests that whatever else you might be, you are not the monster those stories describe." Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to what might have been relief. "You do not fear me?" "Should I?" She turned to face him fully. "You warned me about the danger I might face. You told me others were coming, presumably to give me time to prepare or flee. A true monster would simply have taken what it wanted and left me dead in the snow." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, those pale eyes studying her face as if searching for some sign of hidden terror or revulsion. "Most humans who learn what I am react with panic or rage. Some few try to bargain for their lives. None have ever responded with rational analysis. Perhaps you have encountered the wrong humans." Elenora returned to her seat beside the fire. "Or perhaps isolation has taught me that survival often depends on adapting to unexpected circumstances rather than fighting against them. The others who are coming, my pack, They will not all share your calm perspective on unexpected circumstances. His voice carried a weight of experience and regret. Some have been hurt by humans. Others simply do not trust. When they arrive, wounded and desperate as I was, they may see you as either salvation or threat. Then we must ensure they see salvation. She reached for her herb stores, mind already working through possibilities. Tell me what I need to know about caring for your kind. What promotes healing? What soothes pain? What should I avoid that might cause harm? The questions seemed to surprise him. You would learn to care for creatures you have only just discovered exist. I learned to care for humans by studying their needs and weaknesses. I see no reason why the same approach would not work for your people. She selected several dried plants, beginning to arrange them in small piles. Though I suspect the remedies will need to be quite different. For the first time since she had found him, Kieran smiled. It transformed his face completely, making him look younger and far more approachable. Silver will burn us, though not fatally unless it reaches the heart. Holy water causes pain, but no lasting damage. Garlic is merely unpleasant, despite what the stories claim. We heal fastest when we are warm and at peace, slowest when we are cold and agitated. And the blood you require? Animal blood can sustain us, though human is more nourishing. We do not need to kill to feed. A small amount taken willingly is enough to maintain strength for days. He watched her carefully as he spoke. I haven't fed since before the storm. I am weak, but not yet desperate. Elenora nodded, filing away the information with the same clinical detachment she might have brought to learning about any unfamiliar patient's needs. How many are in your pack? 4, counting myself. Marcus and Thomas are old enough to control themselves around humans, though they may not trust you immediately. Elena is younger and has been badly hurt in the past. She may react with aggression until she understands you mean no harm. Elena. The name caught her attention. Another woman traveling with 3 males. That seems unusual for medieval customs, even among your kind. She is pack. The simple statement carried absolute finality. She stays with us because we protect her. In return, she uses abilities the rest of us lack. She can sense intentions, detect lies, feel the emotions of others at a distance. Those gifts have saved our lives more than once. A distant sound interrupted their conversation, the howl of wind that might not have been entirely wind. Kieran's head turned sharply toward the cave entrance, his entire body suddenly tense with alertness. They have found my trail, he said quietly. The storm has ended, and they are close. Elenora rose and moved to the cave mouth, peering out at a landscape transformed by the blizzard. Snow lay in deep drifts, sculpted by wind into fantastic shapes. The sky was clear for the first time in days, brilliant blue, and so bright it hurt to look at directly. In the distance, she could see dark figures moving up the mountain path, 3 of them, traveling with the same impossible grace through deep snow that Kieran had displayed before his collapse. They moved like wolves, alert, coordinated, deadly efficient. What do I need to know about greeting them? She asked, turning back to Kieran. Do not make sudden movements. Do not touch any of them without permission. Speak calmly and clearly. They will be able to smell fear if you feel it. Most importantly, remember that I am their alpha. They will not harm you as long as I forbid it. And if they choose not to listen to you, Kieran's smile turned sharp, revealing teeth that were slightly too pointed to be entirely human. Then you will discover why I carry this ring, and why they follow me despite their individual strength. The warming stones had been Eleonora's innovation during her second winter in the cave. Smooth river rocks collected from the valley below. They held heat for hours after being warmed by the fire. She had arranged them throughout the sleeping areas and along the walking paths, creating pools of warmth that made the vast cave feel more like a home than a refuge. Now, as she hurriedly placed additional stones near the fire to heat, she blessed the foresight that had led her to gather so many. 4 supernatural beings would require more warmth than one human woman, and her carefully rationed wood supply could easily provide through fire alone. The first to arrive was Marcus. He appeared in the cave mouth like a shadow given form, tall, lean, with dark hair and eyes that immediately fixed on Kieran with obvious relief. Behind the relief, however, was suspicion that turned razor-sharp when those eyes shifted to Elenora. Alpha. Marcus's voice carried formal respect, but also an undertone of question. He remained near the entrance, poised for either attack or flight. Marcus. Kieran's response held the quiet authority that marked him as pack leader. This is Elenora. She saved my life and offers sanctuary to us all. A human. The words carried no particular emotion, but Marcus's posture suggested he found the concept inherently problematic. In a storm like that, most humans would have let even their own kind die rather than risk themselves. Most humans have never lived 7 years alone in these mountains, Elenora said calmly, continuing to arrange heated stones in the alcove she had designated for him. Isolation teaches different lessons about the value of life. Marcus studied her for a long moment, nostrils flaring slightly as he tested her scent for traces of fear or deception. You smell of herbs and wood smoke and honesty, he said finally, but also of something else, something that suggests you are not entirely what you appear to be. Before Elenora could respond to this cryptic observation, Thomas arrived. He was broader than Marcus, with graying hair and scars that spoke of battles survived through skill rather than luck. Unlike Marcus, he showed no immediate suspicion. Instead, his attention went directly to assessing the cave's defensive capabilities and resources. Secure location, he said approvingly. Multiple exit routes, good sight lines, natural barriers against approach. The monks who built this place understood strategy as well as sanctuary. Thomas. Kieran's greeting carried warmth that spoke of long friendship. Your assessment? We were followed part of the way up the mountain, but our pursuers turned back when the storm worsened. They will likely return when weather permits, but we have time to prepare. Thomas's gaze settled on Elenora, with professional interest rather than suspicion. You are the healer who aided our Alpha. I am Elenora, she said simply. And yes, I brought Kieran inside when I found him in the snow. I offer the same aid to all who arrive at my door in genuine need. Practical, Thomas said with approval. In my experience, healers who ask too many questions about their patient's nature often provide inferior care. The third arrival made no attempt at stealth or formal greeting. Elena simply materialized in the cave mouth, moved immediately to Kieran's side, and dropped to her knees beside him, with a soft sound of distress. She was younger than the others, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of old pain. You were hurt, she said, hands hovering over the place where his wounds had been. Badly hurt. I felt your pain across miles of mountain. I am healed now, Kieran assured her gently, thanks to our host. Elena's head turned sharply toward Elenora, and suddenly the cave filled with a tension that had nothing to do with physical threat. Those dark eyes seemed to look through and beyond Elenora's physical form, searching for something deeper and more fundamental. You have touched death often, Elena said finally. It clings to your hands like perfume. but you have also touched something else. Something that sleeps in your blood and waits for awakening. Elena, Marcus said warningly, do not speak in riddles to someone who has shown us kindness. It is not a riddle, Elena replied, but she moved away from Elenora to settle beside the fire. It is simply what I see, what I feel. This one has potential for more than she knows. Elenora decided that Elena's cryptic observations could be explored later, when the immediate practical needs had been addressed. You are all wounded, she said, returning to the familiar territory of assessment and care. Not as severely as Kieran was, but you need rest and healing. Indeed, now that she looked closely, she could see signs of recent battles on all three newcomers. Marcus favored his left arm and had dried blood on his shirt. Thomas moved with the careful gait of someone nursing damaged ribs. Elena's cloak showed tears that suggested close encounters with claws or blades. We encountered hunters 3 days ago, Thomas explained when he noticed her examination. Church-sponsored vampire killers who have been tracking us since we left the lowlands. We escaped, Marcus added, but not without cost. 2 of their number will trouble no one again, but they wounded all of us before we could withdraw. Then you need food, rest, and medical attention, Elenora said practically. I have prepared sleeping areas for each of you, with warming stones to help your bodies heal. My store of preserved meat will stretch to feed 4, though we may all be hungry by spring's end. You would share your food with us? Elena asked, genuine surprise in her voice. Even knowing what we are, what we require to truly thrive? I would share my food with anyone who arrived at my door wounded and in need of sanctuary, Elenora replied. Your nature does not change the fundamental obligation of hospitality. Kieran pushed himself to a sitting position, moving with the careful control of someone who was healing rapidly, but not yet at full strength. You understand what Elena meant about what we require? I understand that you need blood to maintain full health, Elenora said. I also understand that you have chosen not to take it from me by force, which suggests you would accept it if freely offered. The silence that followed her words was profound. Marcus and Thomas exchanged glances that spoke of wordless communication. Elena's eyes widened with something that might have been awe. Kieran's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for her to read. You would offer your blood? Marcus asked finally. To creatures you have known less than 2 days? I would offer what aid I could to beings who chose honor over hunger, Elenora corrected gently. The decision of whether to accept would be yours. Elena rose suddenly and moved to Elenora's side, reaching out as if to touch her face before stopping just short of contact. You are not as human as you appear, she said softly. There is something sleeping in you, something that recognizes what we are because it shares our nature. You feel the call, do you not? The pull toward darkness and power. Elenora considered the question seriously. There had been moments, especially in the deepest winter, nights, when she felt something stirring in her blood, a restlessness, a hunger for something she could not name. She had attributed it to loneliness and the strange effects of prolonged isolation. I feel something, she admitted, but I do not know what it is. It will awaken, Elena said with quiet certainty. Being near us, caring for us, sharing blood with us, it will call to whatever sleeps in your heritage and bring it into the light. The ancient map fragment arrived with the 4th vampire, carried in a leather pouch that had seen better centuries. Dmitri was older than the others, not in appearance, for he looked no more than 30, but in the weight of years that settled around him like a visible aura. When he spread the parchment on the cave floor near the fire, Elenora saw networks of tunnels and safe houses marked across what appeared to be half the known world. The sanctuary network, Dmitri explained, his accent carrying traces of languages she didn't recognize. Built over centuries by those who understood that creatures like us would always need places of refuge. This cave is marked here. Though the notation is so old, I thought the location might be legend rather than reality. Elenora studied the map with fascination and growing unease. Her sanctuary was connected to something vast and ancient, a web of hiding places that suggested vampires had been fleeing persecution for longer than recorded history. How many safe houses are there? Were, Dmitri corrected grimly. Many have been discovered and destroyed. Others lost when their guardians died without passing on the knowledge. We have been searching for this one for months, following rumors and half-remembered stories. Searching for it why? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Kieran spoke from his resting place, voice carrying the weight of difficult decisions. Because we need a permanent base. Somewhere defensible where we can establish more than temporary shelter. The hunters who pursued us are part of a larger organization, one that has been systematically destroying our kind across the continent. Thomas moved to crouch beside the map, tracing routes with a scarred finger. They call themselves the Order of the Silver Cross, funded by the church but operating independently, with resources that suggest noble backing as well. They have developed new techniques for tracking us, new weapons that are more effective than anything we have faced before. They found our last sanctuary 3 weeks ago, Marcus added, his voice tight with old anger. We barely escaped, and others were not so fortunate. Eleanor, who had been unusually quiet since her arrival, suddenly spoke. They have something new, something that allows them to follow our scent across distances that should make tracking impossible. And their leader, he is different from the others. Stronger, more intelligent, more dangerous. A vampire hunter with vampiric abilities? Elenora asked. Not vampiric, Elena said, shaking her head. But not entirely human either. There is something about him that makes my gift recoil when I try to sense his intentions. It is as if he carries darkness that recognizes our darkness and knows how to use it against us. The revelation settled over the cave like a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain wind. Elenora found herself looking at her guests with new understanding. They were not simply traveling through her territory. They were refugees seeking permanent asylum from an enemy that had proved capable of destroying sanctuaries that had stood for centuries. "How long do we have?" she asked, surprising herself with the automatic inclusion of herself in whatever plans they were making. "Days, perhaps a week," Dmitri replied. "The storm will have delayed them, but they are persistent. Once they realize we survived and locate this cave, they will come with sufficient force to end us." "Then we need to prepare defenses," Elenora said practically. "This cave has advantages they may not expect." Kieran sat up straighter, eyes focusing on her with sharp attention. "You would fight beside us? Against human enemies who would consider you guilty of heresy simply for sheltering us?" "I chose to bring you into my sanctuary," she replied. "That choice carries consequences I am prepared to accept. Besides, anyone who destroys places of refuge for personal gain forfeits the right to my sympathy, regardless of what species they belong to." The next few days fell into patterns that surprised Elenora with their domesticity. Despite their supernatural nature, her guests had practical needs remarkably similar to those of human travelers. They required food, shelter, clothing repair, and medical attention for their healing wounds. More importantly, they needed the psychological comfort that came from security and acceptance. She established routines that accommodated their differences while maintaining the basic structure that had kept her alive for 7 years. The vampires rested during daylight hours, though unlike the legends claimed, they were not helpless in sunlight. Direct exposure caused discomfort and slower healing, but they could function when necessary. Evenings became times for planning and conversation. Thomas proved to have an encyclopedic knowledge of military history and defensive strategy. Marcus contributed detailed observations about the Order's methods and capabilities. Elena's empathic gifts allowed her to sense approaching threats long before they became visible. Dimitri's ancient memories contained information about tunnel systems and escape routes that had been forgotten for generations. Kieran coordinated their efforts with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command, but Elenora noticed that he consistently deferred to her judgment about anything relating to the cave itself or the practical aspects of survival in mountain conditions. More than that, she caught him watching her with an expression that went beyond mere gratitude or strategic alliance. "You were not entirely truthful when you said you had been alone for 7 years, he said one evening when they found themselves working together to organize medical supplies while the others slept. "What do you mean?" "You have the manner of someone accustomed to authority and responsibility. Someone who has led others, made decisions that affected lives beyond your own." His hands worked steadily as he spoke, sorting herbs with surprising knowledge of their properties. "This cave shows signs of modifications that would require more labor than one person could accomplish alone." Elenora paused in her own work, considering how much truth to share. Travelers have stayed here over the years. Some were grateful enough to help with improvements before they continued their journeys. Others were too injured to travel immediately and contributed labor while they healed. And some never left at all. Some chose to remain through the winter rather than risk travel in harsh weather, she admitted. A few decided they preferred mountain life to whatever they had been fleeing in the lowlands. They helped expand the living areas, improve the drainage, strengthen the defenses against weather and wildlife. Where are they now? Gone. By choice, in most cases. Mountain winters are harsh, and not everyone finds the isolation as comfortable as I do. Others. She gestured toward the small cemetery behind the cave. Mountain life can be dangerous. Accidents, sudden illnesses, encounters with wildlife. I have buried 12 people in 7 years. Kieran's hands stilled in their work. You have experience leading a community under difficult circumstances. You know how to make decisions when lives hang in the balance, how to organize resources and assign responsibilities based on individual capabilities. "I know how to survive," she corrected, "and I have learned that survival is often easier when people work together instead of alone." "That is precisely the kind of leadership we need now," he said quietly. "Someone who understands both the practical aspects of defense and the human, the personal elements that determine whether a group of individuals becomes a functioning community or falls apart under pressure. You want me to help you plan our defense against the Order? I want you to help us build something more than a defense." His pale eyes met hers across the flickering firelight. "I want you to help us create a place where our kind can not only survive, but flourish, where we can remember what it means to live without constant fear of discovery and destruction." The request carried implications that went far beyond the immediate crisis. He was asking her to commit not just to helping them survive the coming battle, but to becoming part of their world permanently, to accept transformation from human healer to something else entirely, guardian of a supernatural sanctuary, protector of creatures most humans would consider monsters. The healer's journal had become Eleonora's most dangerous possession. Written in her careful script, it contained observations about vampire physiology that would be invaluable to their enemies, and equally valuable to anyone seeking to understand and help their kind. Each page documented discoveries that no human should possess: the precise temperature, changes that indicated feeding needs, the herbal combinations that accelerated their healing, the emotional triggers that affected their supernatural abilities. She wrote by candlelight in the small hours before dawn, when the vampires rested and she could work undisturbed. The journal had grown thick with accumulated knowledge, becoming a record of adaptation that surprised her with its thoroughness. "You are documenting us like specimens," Marcus observed one night, appearing silently beside her writing alcove. "I am documenting care techniques that work," she replied, without looking up from the page where she was recording Elena's reaction to different warming herb combinations. "Knowledge that could help future healers treat your kind with appropriate methods rather than harmful ignorance. And if that knowledge falls into the wrong hands?" The question she had been avoiding forced her to pause in her writing. "Then it could be used to hurt rather than heal." "Yes, I understand the risk." Marcus settled beside her, studying the open pages with careful attention. Unlike the others, he had maintained consistent wariness about her presence among them. Not hostility, but a soldier's caution about accepting civilians into military situations. "Kieran trusts you completely," he said finally. "Thomas respects your competence. Elena sees potential in you that even you do not recognize. Dmitri values your knowledge of local conditions and resources. But you have reservations." "I have questions." Marcus's tone remained neutral, but she could hear the underlying concern. "You adapt to our presence with unusual ease. You accept information about our nature without the shock or revulsion we have learned to expect. Most troubling, you volunteer to place yourself in danger to protect creatures you have known for less than a week." Elenora set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "What are you asking me, Marcus?" "I am asking whether your unusual acceptance stems from supernatural influence or from something inherent in your own nature." His pale eyes searched her face. "Elena believes you have latent abilities that recognize our kind because they share similar origins. Kieran thinks your compassion and wisdom make you a natural ally to outcasts of any species. I wonder if you might be something else entirely. Such as a plant, someone placed here deliberately to gain our trust and gather information about our capabilities and weaknesses." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Elenora felt her heart racing, not from guilt but from the realization that Marcus's suspicion was entirely reasonable from a tactical perspective. Her rapid acceptance of their supernatural nature, her willingness to risk herself for their protection, her convenient possession of exactly the knowledge and skills they needed. Viewed objectively, it did suggest careful planning rather than fortunate coincidence. "How would you determine the truth?" she asked. "Elena's abilities can detect deception, but only if the deceiver is actively lying. Someone who believes their own cover story would appear truthful to her empathic senses." Marcus leaned back against the cave wall, posture relaxed but eyes alert. "Dmitri knows techniques for uncovering buried memories, methods developed over centuries of dealing with mind magic and supernatural manipulation. And if your investigation reveals that I am exactly what I appear to be, a woman who chose isolation after being exiled from her village, who has survived by helping travelers, and who extended that help to your kind because I saw no meaningful difference between human and vampire suffering, then you would have my complete loyalty as you already have my respect. Marcus's expression softened slightly. But if you are something else, if your memories have been altered, if you have been placed here by our enemies, then we need to know before we trust you with information that could destroy not just us, but every vampire who might seek sanctuary here in the future. The conversation was interrupted by Kieran's approach. Even resting, the pack alpha remained aware of tensions within his group. He moved with the silent grace that marked all of them. But Elenora had learned to recognize the subtle signs of his presence, the way shadows seemed to gather around him, the slight change in air pressure that preceded his arrival. "Marcus raises valid concerns," he said, having obviously overheard enough to understand the discussion. "But his timing is unfortunate. Elena detected movement on the mountain paths an hour ago. Our enemies approach sooner than we anticipated." Elenora rose immediately, her mind shifting to tactical considerations. "How many? How long do we have?" 8 riders, moving carefully but steadily up the main approach. They will reach the cave entrance before dawn. Kieran's voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to crisis leadership. "Elena estimates perhaps 3 hours. "Then Marcus's investigation will have to wait," she said practically. "Whatever I might or might not be, right now you need someone who knows every tunnel and defensive position in this cave system." Marcus studied her face for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. But when this is over, assuming we survive, we will have that conversation. When this is over, you can investigate my entire history, if it brings you peace of mind," Elenora replied. "But right now, we have more immediate problems than my potential duplicity." The next 2 hours passed in intense preparation. Thomas took charge of physical defenses, using his military experience to position obstacles and create choke points that would force attackers into disadvantageous positions. Dimitri and Marcus worked together to set traps using their superior speed and strength to move heavy stones and create hidden pitfalls. Elena stationed herself in the highest chamber of the cave, where her empathic abilities could track the approaching enemy's emotional states and intentions. Kieran coordinated everything, moving between groups to ensure their efforts complemented rather than conflicted with each other. Elenora found herself in the role she had unconsciously been training for throughout her years of isolation, the one who understood every aspect of their sanctuary and could guide others in using its advantages effectively. She led Thomas through tunnel systems that could provide flanking routes or emergency escapes. She showed Dimitri which chambers offered the best acoustic properties for detecting approaching enemies. She explained to Marcus how the cave's natural airflow could be used to carry sound or scent in specific directions. Working with them felt natural in a way that surprised her. Their supernatural abilities complemented her human knowledge, creating a defensive capability that none of them could have achieved alone. More than that, she found herself thinking in terms of we rather than I, for the first time since her exile. "You coordinate well with people who have been fighting together for decades," Kieran observed during a brief pause in their preparations. "You adapt well to incorporating an outsider into established tactical patterns," she replied. "Perhaps we complement each other in ways that go beyond mere circumstance." His pale eyes held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I have been thinking about what you said regarding building something more than a temporary refuge. And I realize that what I have been seeking is not simply a defensible location. It is a home, a place where our kind can remember what it feels like to belong somewhere, to be accepted and valued rather than merely tolerated or feared." The approaching dawn carried the sound of hoofbeats on stone, distant but growing closer. Their enemies had arrived, and soon the sanctuary she had built through 7 years of careful work would face its greatest test. But as Elenora looked around at the vampires she had sheltered, seeing the trust in their faces and the determination in their postures, she realized that whatever the outcome, she had already found something she hadn't known she was seeking. She had found a family worth fighting for. The Church Inquisitor's seal was pressed into red wax that had not yet fully hardened when Dmitri found it. The letter bearing that seal lay clutched in the frozen hand of a messenger who had collapsed just outside the cave's outer perimeter, close enough to have delivered his message, but far enough away to suggest he had been fleeing when the mountain cold claimed him. He was trying to escape, Elena said, her empathic abilities reading the emotional echoes that clung to the dead man like invisible scars. Terrified. Guilty. He knew he was carrying news that would bring death to someone he had come to care about. Dmitri cracked the seal with hands that remained steady, despite the implications of what they were discovering. The parchment was fine quality, bearing the official marks of the Order of the Silver Cross, but it was the content that made him go rigid with shock, then cold fury. "Read it aloud," Kieran commanded, though his voice carried a warning that suggested he already suspected what they would learn. "To Brother Benedict, Inquisitor of the Eastern Reaches," Dmitri began, his accent making the formal Latin sound like a curse. "Your intelligence regarding the sanctuary location has been confirmed. The vampire pack, led by the one called Kieran, has indeed taken refuge in the mountain cave as you predicted. Proceed with the planned assault at dawn, using the route and tactical information provided in your previous correspondence." The silence that followed was profound and deadly. Thomas moved first, his soldier's instincts driving him to pace the cave perimeter, while his mind processed the implications of betrayal. Marcus's hand went to the knife at his belt, though the gesture seemed unconscious. Elena made a small sound of distress and pressed herself against the far wall, as if trying to escape the emotional turmoil radiating from the others. "There is more," Dmitri continued grimly. "Your payment has been arranged as discussed. Upon confirmation of the pack's destruction, the agreed-upon sum will be deposited with the Venetian banking house we have used previously. The Church appreciates your continued service in this matter, and trusts that your unusual heritage will remain our secret as long as our partnership proves mutually beneficial." Kieran's expression went through several changes: surprise, then understanding, then a cold rage that made the temperature in the cave seem to drop by several degrees. "Unusual heritage," he repeated softly. "Payment from the Church. Previous correspondence. Someone among us has been selling information to the Order," Thomas said bluntly. "Someone who knew our location, our route, our capabilities well enough to guide hunters directly to us." "Not someone among us," Marcus corrected, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Someone who has access to that information, but motivation to betray it. Someone whose unusual heritage would make them valuable to vampire hunters, but vulnerable to exposure." Elena's empathic abilities were working overtime, her face pale with the effort of sorting through the emotional chaos surrounding them. "The guilt is old," she said finally. "Established. Long-standing. This is not the first betrayal." Dmitri was scanning the letter again, his ancient memory searching for connections that might not be obvious to the others. "Brother Benedict," he murmured. "I know that name. But not as an inquisitor." "What do you mean?" Kieran asked. 30 years ago, there was a Benedict among the vampires who sought sanctuary in the Paris safe house. Young, newly turned, desperate for guidance in controlling his new nature. Dimitri's eyes were distant with recollection. He claimed to have been attacked by a rogue vampire, turned against his will. We taught him what he needed to know about survival, gave him identity papers, helped him establish a new life. A vampire working with the church to hunt other vampires, Thomas said with disgust. That explains their improved tracking capabilities, their knowledge of our weaknesses and behavioral patterns. It explains more than that, Elena said quietly. The leader I sensed, the one whose intentions I could not read. If he is vampire himself, my abilities would be compromised. Vampire minds are naturally shielded against empathic intrusion. Kieran was studying the letter with the careful attention of someone seeking every possible detail. This mentions previous correspondence, intelligence provided earlier, payment arranged through Venetian bankers. He looked up at his pack. How long has Benedict known about this sanctuary? Since before we arrived here, Marcus realized. He has been tracking us for weeks, possibly months. He knew we would eventually seek this place because I told him about it, Dmitri said, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. Years ago, when he was still playing the role of grateful rescued vampire. I shared information about the sanctuary network, including this location. I thought I was helping someone who needed refuge. You could not have known, Kieran said firmly. None of us suspected. But it explains how the Order found our previous sanctuaries, how they always seemed to arrive just after we had committed to a location. Elena suddenly straightened, her empathic senses detecting something new. They are closer than we thought, she said urgently. I can feel Benedict now. His emotions are like ice, controlled and calculating. But there is something else. Anticipation, satisfaction. He believes this trap will succeed where the others have failed. How much closer? Thomas demanded, already moving toward his weapons. Close enough that retreat is no longer an option, she replied. They have surrounded the mountain approaches. We are contained. Elenora, who had been listening to these revelations with growing horror, finally spoke. The messenger. He was trying to warn us. He discovered the betrayal and died trying to bring us information that might help. A servant with a conscience, Marcus said grimly. Probably someone who worked closely enough with Benedict to learn about the arrangement, but lacked the authority to stop it. The question now is whether we can use this knowledge to our advantage, Kieran said. Benedict expects us to react predictably to a standard assault. But if we know he is coming, if we understand his capabilities and limitations, he expects us to defend the main cave, Thomas said, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. He knows the layout from Dimitri's descriptions. He will plan his attack based on controlling the primary entrance and forcing us deeper into the cave system until we are trapped. But he does not know about the modifications I have made over 7 years, Elenora said slowly. The additional tunnels, the emergency exits, the defensive positions I created without realizing I might someday need them against supernatural enemies. And he does not know about you, Kieran added, his pale eyes focusing on her with sudden intensity. His intelligence tells him about our pack, our capabilities, our standard defensive strategies. But it does not account for a human ally with intimate knowledge of the terrain. More than that, Elena said, her voice carrying a strange note of certainty. I can feel something changing in you, Elenora. The stress, the proximity to our kind, the commitment you have made to our survival. It is awakening whatever sleeps in your blood. Benedict's plans do not account for that awakening. Dmitri folded the letter carefully, his expression thoughtful. There is one more possibility we have not considered. If Benedict has been tracking us for months, feeding information to the church, he will have reported our pack composition accurately. 4 vampires, No human allies. Standard defensive capabilities. Your meaning? Marcus asked. My meaning is that we now possess an advantage he cannot have anticipated, an ally whose very existence contradicts his intelligence reports. Whatever defense we mount, whatever tactics we employ, we can do so with capabilities he has not accounted for in his planning. The sound of wind through the cave entrance changed subtly, carrying scents that made all 4 vampires tense with alert readiness. Dawn was still 2 hours away, but their enemies were moving into position ahead of schedule. They know something has gone wrong with their messenger, Elena said, reading the emotional signatures that drifted on the mountain air. Benedict is suspicious. He has accelerated the timeline. Then we need to decide now, Kieran said with quiet authority. Do we attempt to escape using routes Benedict does not know about? Or do we make our stand here and try to eliminate a threat that will follow us wherever we go? Elenora looked around at the sanctuary she had built, at the vampires she had come to care for, at the life she had constructed through 7 years of patient survival. The choice was actually simple, though its implications would change everything she had believed about herself and her future. We make our stand, she said firmly. This is our home now, and Benedict is about to learn that some sanctuaries are worth dying for. The sanctuary blessing stone had been hidden beneath centuries of moss and debris in the deepest chamber of the cave system. Elenora discovered it while searching for alternative defensive positions, her hands guided by an instinct she didn't understand. When she cleared away the accumulated growth, ancient symbols emerged, carved protective runes that seemed to pulse with their own inner light when her fingers traced their worn surfaces. The stone was larger than she had expected, nearly the size of a man's torso, and positioned at what was obviously the spiritual center of the monks' original sanctuary. Around it, she found the remnants of an altar, holy relics long since crumbled to dust, and traces of prayers carved into the cave walls in multiple languages. The monks blessed this place against supernatural evil, she told the others when she led them to her discovery. But the blessing is conditional. It can be activated by someone with the right knowledge and sufficient spiritual authority. Dmitri studied the symbols with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires. These are older than Christianity, he said slowly. Some of the markings predate any religion I recognize. This place was considered sacred long before the monks arrived. Can you activate it? Thomas asked practically. Will it provide protection against Benedict and his hunters? I think so, Elenora replied, though uncertainty colored her voice. But I don't fully understand what activating it might cost. The blessing was designed to repel supernatural evil, and technically, we qualify as supernatural, Kieran finished. The blessing might protect you by destroying us. Or it might recognize the difference between supernatural beings who seek sanctuary and those who come as predators, Elena suggested. Ancient magic often operates on intention and spiritual alignment rather than simple species classification. The debate was interrupted by sounds from the cave entrance, the careful footsteps of people trying to move silently across stone. Their enemies had arrived ahead of schedule, and time for discussion had run out. How long to activate the blessing? Marcus whispered. I don't know, Elenora admitted. The ritual instructions are written in languages I barely recognize. It could take minutes or hours. Then we proceed with conventional defenses while you work on the blessing as a last resort, Kieran decided. Thomas, Marcus, take positions at the primary choke points. Elena, maintain empathic watch and warn us of tactical changes. Dmitri, you and I will... No. Eleonora's interruption carried a firmness that surprised them all. If I'm going to attempt the blessing ritual, I need someone with me who can provide protection while I'm vulnerable. And if we're making our final stand, I want it to be beside the person I... She stopped. The words she had been about to speak, too dangerous to voice in the midst of tactical planning. Kieran's pale eyes searched her face. "The person you what?" "The person I choose to stand with," she said finally. "Whatever happens next, I want to face it with you." The admission hung in the air between them, carrying implications that went far beyond immediate strategy. Marcus and Thomas exchanged glances that spoke of wordless communication. Elena smiled with genuine warmth despite the approaching danger. Dmitri nodded, as if this development confirmed something he had long suspected. "Then we divide our defense," Kieran said after a moment. "Thomas and Marcus guard the primary entrance. They know each other's fighting styles well enough to coordinate without constant communication. Dmitri takes the secondary tunnel system, where his speed and experience will be most effective against anyone who tries to flank us. Elena maintains overwatch and provides tactical intelligence to all positions. And we attempt the blessing ritual while providing backup support if the conventional defenses are breached," Elenora added. "Exactly." Kieran's expression carried the weight of command, but also something more personal. If the blessing works, it may end this conflict without further bloodshed. If it fails, at least we will have tried every option available to us. The next hour passed in final preparations that felt both frantic and oddly peaceful. Each member of their makeshift family took time to speak privately with the others, sharing words that might be their last, expressing gratitude for friendship and protection, acknowledging the bond that had formed between them despite their differences. Thomas clasped hands with Dmitri in the manner of soldiers who had shared campaigns. "If we survive this, old friend, I think we have found our permanent home." "If we survive this," Dmitri replied, "we will have proven that some sanctuaries are strong enough to transform refugees into protectors." Marcus approached Elenora with the formal respect he might have shown a fellow warrior before battle. "I owe you an apology for my suspicions. Whether you are entirely human or something more, you have shown loyalty that puts my doubts to shame." "Your caution was reasonable," she replied. "In your position, I would have asked the same questions. But thank you for accepting my answers when it mattered." Elena was the last to speak with her, pressing a small object into Elenora's hand, a crystal pendant that caught the firelight with unusual brilliance. "For protection," she said, "and for remembrance, whatever comes next." "What is it?" "A focusing stone, carved by someone who understood the connection between healing and power. It will help you channel whatever abilities awaken in you during the ritual." Elena's dark eyes held depths of ancient wisdom. "Do not be afraid of what you might become, Elenora. Transformation in service of love and protection is always sacred, regardless of the form it takes." Finally, Kieran joined her beside the blessing stone, settling into position with the easy grace that marked all his movements. In his hands were weapons she had not seen before, blades that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it, forged from metals that suggested supernatural craftsmanship. "Where did you get those?" she asked. "They have been in my family for centuries," he replied. "Vampire-forged weapons, designed to be effective against both human and supernatural enemies. I had hoped never to use them in defense of a sanctuary. But you're prepared to do so now." "I am prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect this place and the people I care about." His pale eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. including the woman I have come to love." The words settled between them with the weight of absolute truth. They were facing possible death together, and there was no longer time or reason for careful restraint. Elenora felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from the overwhelming rightness of his admission. "I love you too," she said simply. "I don't fully understand how or why, but I know that whatever I become during this ritual, I want to become it with you beside me." Kieran reached out to touch her face, with fingers that were calloused from sword work, but gentle with emotion. "Then we face this together, whatever the cost." The blessing ritual began with words that seemed to come from some deep well of inherited memory. Elenora found herself speaking in languages she didn't consciously know, her voice carrying harmonies that echoed strangely in the cave's natural acoustics. The blessing stone responded to her words by growing warm, then hot, then blazing with light that had nothing to do with fire. Power flowed through the cave system like water finding its natural course. She could feel it awakening protective forces that had slumbered since the last monk spoke the final prayers over this sanctuary. But she could also feel it awakening something in herself, abilities she had never suspected, potential that had been waiting for exactly this moment of desperate need. The transformation was not painful, but it was profound. She felt her awareness expanding beyond the boundaries of human perception, her connection to the mountain deepening until she could sense every creature moving within miles of the cave. Most importantly, she could feel the 4 vampires who had become her family, their supernatural natures no longer foreign, but familiar, as if she had always carried the ability to understand and connect with their kind. "Elenora," Kieran said softly, and she opened eyes she hadn't realized she had closed. "Look at yourself." She looked down and saw that her hands were glowing with the same light that emanated from the blessing stone. The crystal Eleanor had given her was pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she could feel power flowing through her body like blood through her veins. "What am I becoming?" "Something wonderful," he replied. "Something that bridges the gap between human and vampire, mortal and immortal. Something that can protect this sanctuary not through force alone, but through the kind of deep magic that transforms places into true homes." The sound of combat echoed through the cave system. Thomas and Marcus engaging the first wave of attackers. Elena's voice carried from her watch position, calling out tactical information and warnings. The battle for their sanctuary had begun, and they were no longer simply defending against human enemies. They were defending their future. The Inquisitor's silver cross blazed with holy fire as Benedict led his assault through the cave entrance. Unlike the crude weapons carried by his human companions, this was a relic of genuine power, blessed by bishops, consecrated with the blood of martyrs, and forged specifically for the destruction of supernatural creatures. In his hands, it burned with light that made the vampires recoil despite their desperate courage. "So much for the element of surprise," Thomas muttered, pressing himself against the cave wall as silver fire scorched the stone where he had been standing moments before. Benedict stepped into the firelight with the confidence of someone who had planned this assault down to the smallest detail. He looked exactly as Dmitri had described, young in appearance, perhaps 30, but with eyes that held centuries of accumulated betrayal. His pale hair was pulled back severely, and his black robes bore the silver insignia of the church's most elite vampire hunters. "Kieran," he called out, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone born to nobility. "I know you can hear me. There is no escape this time. I have planned too carefully, waited too long, to allow you to slip away again." Marcus appeared from the shadows like a striking serpent, his blade aimed at Benedict's throat with lethal precision. The silver cross flared, and Marcus screamed as holy fire engulfed his arm. He stumbled backward, clutching burned flesh that would take days to heal properly. "Predictable," Benedict said with satisfaction. "You always send Marcus first. He lacks the patience for true strategy. Thomas will be next, attempting to flank from the eastern tunnel. Then Dmitri from above, using his speed to compensate for the confined space." As if summoned by the prediction, Thomas burst from the tunnel Benedict had indicated, only to find 3 crossbow bolts waiting for him. He twisted desperately, avoiding 2 but taking the 3rd in his shoulder. Silver-tipped, the bolt burned like acid and sent him crashing into the cave wall. "You know us too well," Dimitri's voice echoed from the shadows above, but he made no move to attack. 30 years of shared knowledge. 30 years of trust you have betrayed. 30 years of pretending to be something I despise, Benedict corrected. Do you have any idea what it costs to live among creatures that should not exist? To pretend gratitude for help I never wanted? To watch you justify your predatory nature with talk of honor and family? 6 more figures moved into the cave. Human soldiers wearing the blessed armor of the church's elite vampire hunters. Their weapons gleamed with silver, and their faces showed the fanatic dedication of men who believed they served a divine cause. Elena's voice carried from her watch position high in the cave system. 8 total attackers. Benedict is shielding his emotions, but the others feel confident. They believe this is already over. Then they are about to learn how wrong confidence can be, Marcus growled, shifting his grip on his sword despite his injured arm. The first real exchange came when Thomas and Marcus moved together, using their decades of partnership to coordinate an attack that should have overwhelmed even supernatural reflexes. They struck from opposite directions, forcing Benedict to choose which threat to address first. Instead, he simply raised the silver cross and spoke a single word in Latin. Holy fire exploded outward in all directions, driving both vampires back with screams of agony. The human soldiers pressed their advantage, moving forward with disciplined precision, while their supernatural enemies were momentarily blinded and disoriented. "You cannot win," Benedict called out, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "I know every ability you possess, every tactic you favor, every weakness you try to hide. This sanctuary is a trap, and you walked into it exactly as I planned." Dmitri finally attacked, dropping from above with the speed that had made him legendary among their kind. But Benedict was ready even for that, spinning aside while one of his soldiers thrust upward with a silver-tipped spear. Dmitri barely avoided the point, landing off balance and vulnerable to the crossbow bolts that immediately followed. "Your pack is finished," Benedict continued, pressing his attack while his enemies struggled to regroup. "Decades of hunting your kind have taught us everything we need to know about vampire capabilities and limitations. You heal quickly, but not instantly. You are strong, but not invulnerable. You coordinate well, but not perfectly." Elena's warning cry came just as the secondary assault began. More soldiers poured through tunnels that should have been hidden, led by hunters who clearly knew the cave system's layout in precise detail. The vampires found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, and facing enemies who had planned specifically for their supernatural abilities. "Benedict's intelligence was thorough," Thomas said grimly, blood running from multiple silver burns on his arms and chest. "Too thorough," Marcus agreed, backing toward the deeper chambers where they might find more defensible positions. "No," Dmitri said suddenly, his ancient eyes focusing on something the others had missed. "Not thorough enough. He planned for our pack's capabilities. He accounted for our standard defensive strategies. But he planned this assault based on intelligence that is no longer complete." Benedict's confident expression flickered slightly as he realized what Dmitri meant. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that your intelligence reports describe a pack of 4 vampires defending a cave sanctuary," Elena called down from her position. "But they do not account for the woman who transformed this place from refuge into home. They do not account for abilities that are awakening even as we speak." In the deepest chamber of the cave, light blazed with supernatural intensity as the blessing ritual reached its culmination. The power Elenora had been channeling was no longer simply protective. It was transformative, changing not just her but the very nature of the sanctuary itself. Benedict's eyes widened as he felt the shift in the cave's spiritual atmosphere. "What is she doing?" "She is becoming what this sanctuary needs her to become," Kieran's voice carried from the depths, calm and absolutely certain. "And you, Benedict, are about to discover that some transformations cannot be planned for, predicted, or defeated by conventional tactics." The silver cross in Benedict's hands began to dim as power older and deeper than church blessing flowed through the mountain itself. The blood bond crystal formed in the exact moment when Benedict's silver blade found its mark in Kieran's chest. Elenora felt the wound as if it were her own, a burning agony that drove her to her knees beside the blessing stone. But instead of weakening her transformation, the shared pain catalyzed it, crystallizing the connection between them into something physical and permanent. The crystal emerged from where their blood had mingled on the cave floor during her healing work, a gem of impossible beauty that pulsed with combined life force. It was no larger than a child's fist, but it blazed with power that made the blessing stone's light seem dim by comparison. "Kieran!" Her cry echoed through the cave system with supernatural resonance, carrying not just sound, but pure emotion that struck everyone present like a physical blow. Benedict staggered, his confident expression cracking as psychic energy washed over him. His human soldiers cried out in confusion, suddenly experiencing emotions that belonged to neither their training nor their faith. Even Marcus and Thomas paused in their desperate fighting, feeling strength and determination that flowed from an external source. In the deepest chamber, Elenora rose with the crystal clutched in her glowing hands. The transformation was complete now. She could feel it in every cell of her body. No longer entirely human, but not vampire either. Something new. Something that bridged the gap between mortal and immortal, natural and supernatural. "You wanted to destroy our sanctuary," she said, her voice carrying through stone corridors with preternatural clarity. "But you never understood what this place truly is." She moved through the tunnel system with speed that matched Kieran's supernatural grace, the crystal's light preceding her like a beacon. The blessing she had activated was no longer confined to protective wards. It flowed through her, making her the living embodiment of sanctuary itself. Benedict met her approach in the main chamber, silver cross raised and blazing with renewed holy fire. "Whatever you have become, woman, you are still mortal, still vulnerable to blessed silver and sanctified flame." "Perhaps," Elenora replied, stepping into the circle of his weapon's radiance without flinching, "but I am no longer alone." The crystal in her hands pulsed, and suddenly Kieran was beside her. The silver wound in his chest had closed completely, healed by power that flowed between them through their newly formed bond. More than healed, he moved with strength that exceeded even his normal supernatural capabilities. "Impossible," Benedict breathed. "The wound was mortal. Silver through the heart should have killed him if he were still purely vampire." Elena's voice carried from above, filled with wonder rather than tactical information. But the bond has changed him too, made him something more than what he was. Thomas and Marcus pressed their attack on Benedict's soldiers with renewed vigor, their own wounds healing as power flowed to them through pack bonds that were themselves strengthened by the crystal's influence. Dmitri appeared from the shadows, moving with speed that seemed to bend reality around him. But it was the confrontation between Benedict and the bonded pair that would determine the battle's outcome. "You betrayed your own kind for 30 years, Kieran said, his vampire-forged blades singing as they cut through the air. You lived among us, learned from us, accepted our protection, all so you could deliver us to those who would see us destroyed." "I did what was necessary," Benedict replied, but his voice carried less conviction than before. The silver cross was dimming, its holy fire struggling against the deeper power that emanated from the blood bond crystal. "Your kind are predators, monsters. The world is better without creatures who choose honor over hunger," Elenora interrupted, moving to flank him while Kieran attacked directly. "Without beings who form families and protect the innocent, you have spent 30 years living proof that vampires are capable of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Yet you still choose to destroy rather than understand." The final exchange happened too quickly for human eyes to follow. Benedict's cross flared one last time, silver fire reaching desperately for Kieran's heart. But Elenora was there, the crystal's power creating a shield that turned blessed metal aside like morning mist. Kieran's blade found its mark with surgical precision, not through Benedict's heart, which would have been mere execution, but through the hand that held the silver cross. The holy weapon fell to the cave floor with a sound like breaking bells. "Yield," Kieran commanded, his blade at Benedict's throat. "I cannot," Benedict replied, but his voice held defeat rather than defiance. "Even if you spare me, the Order will not. I know too much about their methods, their resources, their plans. They cannot allow me to live if I am no longer useful." Elena dropped from her watch position with fluid grace, her empathic abilities focused entirely on the defeated vampire. "He speaks truth," she confirmed. "Fear overwhelms everything else now. Fear of his former allies, fear of retribution, fear of living with what he has done." Elenora looked at the vampire who had nearly destroyed everything she had come to love, seeing not a monster, but a broken soul who had chosen betrayal over trust, isolation over community. "There is another option," she said quietly. "What option?" Benedict asked, though hope warred with suspicion in his voice. "Redemption," she replied simply. "Stay here. Work to repair the damage you have caused. Help us build the sanctuary network stronger than before, better protected against future betrayals." "You would trust me after what I have done?" "I would offer you the chance to become worthy of trust," she corrected. "The choice of what to do with that chance would be yours." Kieran studied Benedict's face for a long moment, then slowly lowered his blade. "The Pack's decision must be unanimous," he said. "But if the others agree, you may remain, under strict conditions and constant supervision, until you have proven that your conversion is genuine." One by one, the other vampires nodded their consent. Even Marcus, despite his mistrust and his silver burns, recognized the wisdom in offering redemption rather than revenge. The remaining human soldiers, seeing their supernatural leader defeated and disarmed, chose surrender over suicidal resistance. The battle for the sanctuary was over, won not through superior violence, but through the transformative power of love, trust, and the willingness to offer second chances even to enemies. The new sanctuary seal gleamed in the firelight, a symbol that had taken shape naturally as Elenora worked to combine human healing arts with vampire protection magic. Carved into the stone above the cave entrance, it bore elements from both traditions, the caduceus of healing intertwined with symbols of supernatural protection, all unified by the crystalline pattern that echoed the blood bond she shared with Kieran. Spring had come early to the mountains, bringing with it pilgrims and travelers who spoke in hushed whispers about a sanctuary where the impossible had become commonplace. Word had spread through networks both human and supernatural that there was a place of healing where all who came in genuine need would find refuge, regardless of their nature or their past. 3 more arrivals yesterday, Thomas reported during their evening council meeting. A vampire family from the Eastern Territories, fleeing persecution. They carry letters of introduction from the Frankfurt safe house. And 2 human pilgrims who claim to have prophetic dreams about this place, Eleanor added, her empathic abilities confirming their sincerity. They speak of visions where wounded creatures find healing through the touch of someone who bridges 2 worlds. Elenora looked around the expanded cave system that had become home to dozens of supernatural refugees over the past months. The modifications she and the others had made were no longer simple survival improvements. They were the infrastructure of a thriving community. Sleeping chambers carved with symbols of protection, healing areas equipped with both traditional herbs and supernatural remedies, workshop spaces where vampires shared knowledge that had been preserved for centuries. "The network grows stronger each week," Dimitri said, spreading updated maps across the council table they had carved from mountain stone. Safe houses from Milano to Edinburgh report increased cooperation, shared resources, coordinated defenses. What we built here is becoming the model for sanctuaries across the continent. Benedict, who had earned his place at the council table through months of dedicated service, added quietly, "The Church has officially disbanded the Order of the Silver Cross. Too many questions were being asked about their methods and their failures. But individual hunters still operate, and other organizations have taken up the cause of vampire persecution. Which is why the Sanctuary Network must be more than just hiding places," Kieran said, his authority as Alpha now expanded to encompass not just their original pack, but the entire community that had grown around them. "We need centers of learning, places where both humans and vampires can develop understanding that goes beyond mere tolerance." Elenora felt the truth of his words resonate through the bond they shared. Her transformation had stabilized into something unprecedented, not quite vampire, but far more than human. She aged more slowly now, healed faster, and possessed abilities that allowed her to sense the needs and intentions of both species with equal clarity. Most importantly, she could serve as interpreter between worlds that had been separated by fear and misunderstanding for too long. "The wounded still come," she said, thinking of the 3 vampires currently recovering in the healing chambers, all survivors of attacks by human fanatics who had refused to accept the new reality of coexistence. But so do the curious, humans who want to understand rather than destroy, vampires who seek knowledge rather than mere survival. Marcus, now fully healed from his silver burns but bearing scars that would never completely fade, gestured toward the library alcove where human and vampire scholars worked side by side. Knowledge that was preserved in isolation is being shared and expanded. Medical techniques that work for both species, philosophical frameworks for understanding supernatural ethics, even artistic collaborations that neither culture could have achieved alone. The evening's discussion was interrupted by Elena's sudden alertness, her empathic senses detecting new arrivals approaching through the mountain passes, but her expression showed excitement rather than alarm. "A delegation," she announced. "Official representatives from 3 different regions. They come seeking formal alliance, not just informal cooperation." Within the hour, the cave entrance was filled with figures in travel-stained cloaks, a mix of human and vampire diplomats who carried papers bearing seals Elenora recognized from Dimitri's historical knowledge. City-states, noble houses, even merchant guilds had begun to understand that the supernatural community represented allies rather than threats, resources rather than problems. "We seek audience with the guardian of this sanctuary," their leader announced formally. "We come with proposals for mutual benefit and shared protection." "I am the guardian," Elenora replied, stepping forward with Kieran beside her. The blood bond crystal, now worn as a pendant around her neck, caught the firelight and cast rainbow patterns on the cave walls. "You are welcome here, regardless of your nature or your purpose, as long as you come in peace." The negotiations that followed extended through the night and into the following days. Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, cultural exchange programs, the framework for a new reality where supernatural beings would no longer need to hide in shadows or flee from sanctuary to sanctuary. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most to Elenora. Walking through the cave system at dawn, checking on patients in the healing chambers, sharing meals with the diverse community that had grown around them, Kieran beside her always, their bond allowing wordless communication and shared purpose that made leadership feel natural rather than burdensome. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked one morning as they stood together at the cave entrance, watching the sun paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and rose. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," she admitted. 7 years of solitude taught me the value of silence and contemplation. But I would not trade what we have built for any amount of peaceful isolation. Even knowing the dangers we still face, the enemies who will never accept our existence, the challenges of leading a community that grows larger and more complex each month. Especially knowing those things, she turned to face him, seeing in his pale eyes the love and commitment that had transformed them both. The greatest acts of courage begin with simple choices, choosing compassion over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. Everything else follows from those fundamental decisions. In the distance, new travelers could be seen, making their way up the mountain path. Some came seeking healing, others knowledge, still others simply refuge from a world that had not yet learned to accept them. All would find welcome in the sanctuary that had grown from one woman's choice to bring a dying stranger in from the snow. The tarnished bronze bell had been restored to its place of honor, its clear voice now calling regularly across the mountain valleys, not to announce death, but to proclaim that sanctuary existed for all who sought it with honest hearts.